शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिनि शङ्करतोषिनि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि दितिशुकरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining us. We have back with us scholar Sreejit Datta again. Thank you Datta for joining us again.
Hi, nice to be back here.
Hi. So finally today we are going to discuss one of the stars of the Indian national movement's radical faces, Bipin Chandra. So Sreejit, what can you tell us about him?
That's right. So I really like the choice of word that you have for today's talk's title, or today's episode's title rather, radical. That is indeed a word that should be used while describing Bipin Chandra and his life, his ideas, but in a sense which is way deeper than we usually ascribe to it. You know, when we think of the word radical or someone or their thoughts, their work as radical, then basically we tend to mean that somebody has been quite extreme in their views, be it political, be it social, religious. But in the case of Bipin Chandra, I think the word radical is important and quite profound, in a sense that he has taken a view of nationalism, a view of imperialism, and the overall destiny of India in a way which was quite ahead of the times in which he lived. And for that very reason, many people misunderstood him. Many contemporaries of Bipin Chandra misunderstood him. And I'm sure that if I narrate some of those ideas as Bipin Chandra explained them, of, for example, the destiny of India and of imperialism and nationalism, then many people will surely, at first at least, will tend to misunderstand him. They will not be able to perhaps easily grasp, or if I may use the word digest, his ideas. So let me go to these ideas, but before that I'll share some data with respect to his life. You know, he was born in 1858 in the Sylhet district in modern day Bangladesh, but earlier it used to be in undivided Bengal and India. And from there, after finishing his school, he reached Calcutta and got himself admitted in the Presidency College, which is where his ideas started to flourish. He was introduced to a wider world, and he, most importantly, came in contact with the Brahmo Samaj. Now, his first encounter with this in his own time's perspective, a sort of heretical religious organization, happened with the most important leader, orator, and intellectual, or even religious figure of that time, that is Keshav Chandra Sen. Now, For those of us who are not aware of who Keshav Chandra Sen was, Keshav Chandra, of course, started his career as a Brahmo preacher under Maharishi Devendranath when the Brahmo Samaj had not become bifurcated or even trifurcated. And in time, he rose through the ranks, became an Acharya of the Brahmo Samaj. And later on, he showed certain very radical views, especially with regard to his views uh, and his attraction towards Christianity, for which there was a clear break from the Brahmo Samaj led by Maharishi Devendranath. And Keshav Chandra created his own faction or church, as he called it, the Indian Brahmo Samaj or Bharat Brahmo Samaj. Now, it was around this time when he had created this new church or dispensation of the Brahmo Samaj that our protagonist of today's episode, Bipin Chandra Pal, came in contact with him. Basically, he started attending the lectures and speeches of Keshav Chandra and became highly influenced by his ideas. Now, after Keshav Chandra became, a man in himself and an institution in himself, there was another break in the Brahmo Samaj, and the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj was created, as we know. That was around late 1870s. I think it was 1878, if I'm not wrong. So at that time, people in general, especially the intellectuals, young intellectuals in Bengal, were moving slowly away from Keshav Chandra.
Okay.
Perhaps it was because of the two reasons. One, he had shown a lot of attraction towards Christian ideas and ideals, and also towards the very end of his career, he was also showing signs of returning back to the so-called original Hindu fold because of he had come under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna.
I see.
Now, as a result of this, the more proud sections of the younger followers of Keshav Chandra, who wanted to maintain their national character as a distinct Indian or Hindu organization, who wanted to preserve that identity, they basically created this Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, which was mainly led by people like Shivnath Shastri. And also the other reason involved in this was they wanted to make a distinct identity. They wanted to create or preserve rather a distinct identity from the rather orthodox position of Hinduism or orthodox schools within Hinduism, like Vaishnavism or Shaktism. So, because of these two motivations, the Sadharan Brahma Samaj was created, and in time we see Bipin Chandra Pal also gravitating towards the Sadharan Brahma Samaj. But it has to be kept in mind that the first influence in his life was coming from Keshav Chandra Sen's ideas.
Right.
Okay. Now, the next phase is where we get to see Bipin Chandra Pal as someone who gets a scholarship from the Sadharan Brahma Samaj in order to study comparative religious studies in England,
Okay.
for which he travels to England with the help of that scholarship. And after he finished his course, he stayed back for some months in order to preach religious ideas. Now, what kind of religious ideas was he preaching back then? He was mainly preaching Vedanta, as it was a favorite of the Brahmo intellectuals, with their own interpretation of it. And he was also slowly gravitating towards, and this is an interesting part, the Vaishnava school of thought, uh, which was basically also something that we can find in his roots. I mean, from where he comes, his family, etc.
Dada,
So,
Sreejit, my internet was gone for
okay,
1 or 2 minutes. Okay, can you
okay,
repeat everything?
yeah. Can
I'll
you
need to call you.
give me a thread of where we went off? How far
That
were you able to hear?
that Bipin Chandrapal had decided to leave Keshav Chandra Sen, but it's important to keep in mind that his first contact with Brahmo Samaj was in fact Keshav Chandra Sen.
Okay, yes. So, yes, like I was saying, Bipin Chandrapal's initial influence was, of course, Keshav Chandra Sen,
Hmm.
and later he had gravitated towards the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj.
Hmm.
Now, after coming to the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, and of course, because he was a very talented young man, even though he had fallen into poverty, because as soon as his family members came to know that he had embraced Brahmo Samaj ideas, uh, he was excommunicated from his family and his extended family as well. His father stopped providing the monthly allowance that he used to get as a student in Calcutta. He was studying in Presidency College, as I have already mentioned, and that forced him to leave college, leave his studies at the Presidency College, and he fortunately, because he was quite talented, despite the fact that he had left his college studies, his university studies unfinished, he was able to find a job as a teacher. So that's how he was maintaining himself, even though uh, he had to struggle a lot, and that struggle is something that will characterize his entire life right through the end of his life. He
Hmm.
passed away in 1932.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So anyway, when he was out of his college and regularly attending the the uh, Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, he was discovered by the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj leaders as a man of talent, a man of intellectual talent, especially, and was thus given a scholarship using which he could travel to England in order to study comparative religion or comparative religious studies.
Hmm.
Having finished his course, he stayed back in England in order to preach his ideas, his own religious ideas. Now, what sort of religious ideas was he preaching to the English? He was basically speaking of Vedanta. As we might recall, this was an era when the victory of Vedanta had been quite great, quite visible, especially in the West, in the
Hmm.
English speaking countries like USA and Great Britain. So it was an era after, let's say, Vivekananda, and
Hmm.
also, around the same time when, or maybe a little after, when Brahmabandha Upadhyay would travel to England in order to preach Vedanta. Anyway,
Okay.
so it was around this time, in this sort of cultural and religious milieu, that Bipin Chandrapal was preaching Vedanta, religious ideas, to the British.
Hmm.
Now, having done that, when he returns, we get to see that he comes under the influence of Vijay Krishna Goswami. Vijay
Hmm.
Krishna Goswami, who was a very prominent leader of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj to begin with, but who
Okay.
had very soon left the Brahmo Samaj, and he was an Acharya of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. So he left that influential uh, post, and he came back to his original Vaishnava fold. And
Hmm.
again, like Keshav Chandra Sen, one of the main influences in his return to the uh, original fold was none other than Sri Ramakrishna Dev. So, under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, we see Vijay Krishna Goswami finding back his root and becoming a Vaishnava Acharya. He became a guru of many prominent thinkers of the time and many prominent nationalist thinkers.
Hmm.
Like we have discussed in one of the earlier episodes, the case of Acharya Satish Chandra Mukherjee, right? The main force behind the national education
Right.
movement.
Hmm.
Bipin Chandra Pal also became a disciple of Vijay Krishna Goswami. Now, you can see this
Okay.
happening as a result of two reasons or factors. One is because of this common link that both Vijay Krishna Goswami as well as Bipin Chandra Pal share, that of
Hmm.
being, in their earlier career, members of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj.
Hmm.
And of course, because of the kind of uh, regeneration that was happening in the Hindu society with Hindu ideas and ideals as a result of the influence of Swami Vivekananda and his guru Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So
Hmm.
I also think that these were the two main factors which
Hmm.
contributed to Bipin Chandra slowly gravitating back to uh, original Hindu ideas and ideals.
Right.
Okay, so after this, we get to see that Bipin Chandra Pal uh, writing, not after, I think that would be wrong to say that after his return to the Hindu fold, he started writing. He was writing all throughout. I mean, as a young man of 22,
Hmm.
when he was already a member of the Southern Brahmo Samaj, he had
Hmm.
once gone back to his village back in Sylhet, and there he started a Bengali journal called Poridarshok. Okay,
Okay.
now this is quite significant because coming from Sylhet, he starts a journal there in Bengali, and uh, he has already started to show a keen interest in
I
journalistic
see.
profession. So he
Okay.
was writing and editing. Okay, and it's not just that he was writing for the journal that he had established himself, but he was also writing for almost all the leading journals, English
Hmm.
as well as Bengali, of his
Hmm.
time. In fact, one of the journals into which he had contributed the most
Hmm.
was the Modern Review. The
I
very
see.
famous journal run by Ramananda Chatterjee,
Hmm.
which was basically a stronghold of the nationalist thinkers like
Hmm.
Rabindranath, like Bipin Chandra Pal,
Hmm.
and many others, their
Right.
contemporaries.
Hmm.
So he was also writing for the Amrita Bazar Patrika, which was
Okay.
a very important nationalist
Yeah.
daily,
Hmm.
and he had himself started some English uh, magazines, periodicals, journals,
Hmm.
and even dailies. The
Hmm.
most famous of which is Bande Mataram. You
Right.
know, uh, this was an English daily which was
Okay.
started and initially edited by Bipin Chandra Pal before
Okay.
he invited Sri Aurobindo to
Hmm.
come and take over it
Hmm.
as the editor. So that is a very important association
Hmm.
between Bipin Chandrapal and Sri Aurobindo. But
Right.
what is interesting in this is that the connection between Bipin Chandrapal and Sri Aurobindo happened not originally because of Bande Mataram, not because of this journalistic interest.
Okay.
That they have to establish an institution in the journalistic field, and they have to basically preach the mantra of nationalism through it. That
Hmm.
was not the original platform on which they met or on which
Okay.
their connection began.
I see.
Rather, it was the platform of the movement called the national education. So
Oh.
this is something on which we have spoken when we
Hmm.
spoke about Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay as well as Brahmabandhu Upadhyay, and
Yeah.
also when we spoke about Rabindranath. So
Yeah.
this is the platform of creating national education institutions,
Hmm.
colleges or universities or schools, where education will be imparted from a national viewpoint, from a national standpoint, and to teach national ideas and ideals to
Yeah.
students.
Yeah.
That was the common platform that united Bipin Chandra and Aurobindo initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, yeah,
Sir, before going ahead, can you take this question? But I'll put it on the screen as well. Bipin Chandra Pal's assessment that Raja Rammohn Roy was more of a political leader than a theologian. Would you agree?
where has Bipin Chandra given that sort of an assessment?
Reference in Hindu nationalism and its personalities.
No, that may be just one book where he might have made a statement. I'm not sure whether that can be construed or that can be interpreted as that. But
Okay.
I see in Bipin Chandrapal's writings and speeches, he has very clearly said that Raja Ram Mohan Roy's work was mainly religious. So he identifies the main plank of Raja Ram Mohan Roy's works as a spiritual work or a religious work, and it was on the basis of that religious or spiritual movement that every other section of the national life, namely politics, namely social reform, etc., literature, the literary revival of Bengal as well as India as a whole,
Hmm.
all those were centered all those were based on the religious work that the Raja, was doing. In fact, I would like to, maybe read out something from Bipi Chandrapal's speeches where this
Yeah.
point might be made more clear.
Hmm.
Okay, so he has given a speech called the Brahmo Samaj and Nationalism. This was something that he had given on the platform of the Southern Brahmo Samaj. In
Okay.
fact, it was around a time, I think, in the early 1900s, 1901 or 2, that
Hmm.
must be the year when this speech was delivered. And it was at this time when the Southern Brahmo Samaj itself was going through a lot of turmoil. It was
Hmm.
challenged by the old age and infirmity of its earlier leaders like Acharya Shivnath Shastri. So
Right.
people were congregated in order to find who would be the next leader. So it was that in that sort of a context when Bipin Chaudhary delivered this speech, from which I'm
Hmm.
going to quote. Uh, right. So he says that. Uh, The objective of the life and labors of Raja Rammohn Roy, I'm quoting, the founder of the modern Brahmo movement, was the reconstruction of Indian life in the light of the modern ideal. And this explains the manifold characters of the activities of the Raja. Theology and religion, education and social reform, politics and economics, every department of the nation's thought and life received therefore due attention from him, and he sought to work up all these various elements of our national life and ideals along traditional and historic lines to the highest modern standpoint, never losing sight of the old culture of the country, yet ever faithful to the highest modern ideal with which he found his people confronted. Raja Rammohn Roy sought to build up Indian thought and life to meet the requirements of the present Indian situation and to qualify the Indian people to enter the larger life of modern humanity on their own legitimate rights
Hmm.
and in their own proper dignity, and thus coordinated with other nationalities and civilizations to take up on terms of perfect equality with the others their rightful place in the future federation of the world. Raja Rammohn Roy was therefore a most comprehensive ideal. Indeed, his religious work, which culminated in the establishment of the Brahmo Samaj, was a section of his large and all embracing program. And though in the subsequent developments of the Brahmo movements, the religious side of the Raja's work necessarily received special emphasis, his larger legacy to his country, even though occasionally overlooked, has never been completely ignored. So he basically says that the major emphasis was on religion, on the
Hmm.
religious work, religious uh, regeneration of the Indian life,
Hmm.
but he had a comprehensive ideal in which all facets of the national life were touched upon. So yeah, this is the kind of response that I would like to give.
Okay. This is another question from that same person. He has asked us three questions.
Okay.
We are taking them now. This question is Bipin Chandrapal's assessment that Rabindranath's theology was less Hindu, more Protestant. Would you agree with that?
No, not at all. I think I have given a response to one of the questions regarding Rabindranath's views, religious views,
Yeah.
and the Hindu character of it, and how he confessed himself that his ideals were more like the mainstream Hindu ideas and ideals rather than the mainstream Brahmo ideas and ideals. So even though he was one of the first proponents after, of course, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Maharishi Devendranath um, in the 20th century, that it is futile to make such distinctions between the Brahmo as a distinct religious identity and Hindu as a distinct religious identity. So he was always describing himself as a Hindu Brahmo, just like somebody would describe themselves as a Hindu Shakto or Hindu Vaishnava.
Right.
So that was his standpoint. But later on, he was quite uh, disturbed by the kind of constant poking of this sort of trivial differentiation between the Brahmo society and the larger Hindu society, for which he maintained a fair amount of distance from the mainstream Brahmo line of thought. And
Okay.
throughout his life, he has written quite frankly with Hindu as a sort of identity label. So that is his view towards
Okay.
religion.
Okay. And this is the last one before we move on.
Okay.
Bipin Chandrapal in his Nationality and Empires writes, quote, Pan-Islamism propaganda will only help to break up any strength left in Islam instead of consolidation, end quote. Your views.
Correct. So this is a correct assessment. In fact, I'm not sure when this particular book or essay came up,
Okay.
but as early as 1914, 1914,
Hmm.
Bipin Chandrapal had warned that Pan-Islamism is going to be the single most challenge before nation-making project in India. So he had a major difference with Mahatma Gandhi and his followers, especially at the time of the Khilafat movement, which was basically merged by Gandhi with the non-cooperation movement that he had started in 1921. And about 1921, 1922, around that time, the merger of the non-cooperation movement started by Gandhi and the Khilafat movement, which was a global movement, in fact, right? Because it was
Yeah.
originating from Turkey, from
Yeah.
the desire of reinstating the Ottoman Empire, right,
Yeah.
and creating the caliphate in there.
Yeah.
So it was because of Bipin Chandrapal's resistance to this idea, or this action rather, of
Yeah.
merging these two movements, that his complete break from the Congress happened. You know, Bipin Chandrapal has been described as an extremist, right? In contrast to the moderates,
Yeah.
right? Or he can be described as a nationalist if you
Hmm.
take the term collaborationist,
Yeah.
as a synonymous term for the moderates.
Yeah.
So the context of this was the Surat Congress, during which there was a break from Congress as far as Bipin Chandrapal as an individual leader was concerned. But it
Hmm.
was not only Bipin Chandrapal who had created a break with Congress around that time, 1907. That was the year.
Okay. Okay.
So there were Lokmanya Tilak, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandrapal, and also our very own Sri Aurobindo. All
Right.
these people had taken a clear stand that complete independence should be the single most agenda. And therefore, the break happened. So, uh, after this Surat Congress in
Hmm.
1907, there
Hmm.
was the first or the initial break that happened between the Congress and Bipin Chandrapal. But after that, he was exiled by the British to Britain, of all places, and he was forced to live there for 3 years, I think from 1908 to 1911. Bipin Chandrapal lived in forced exile in Britain.
I
But
see.
after that, he comes back, and this time he again joins the Congress and starts talking about how a very strong position of India, a strong and independent position of India as a free nation, should be the goal, but not severing all ties with Britain. So some people think that that was an original idea of the Commonwealth, but it was not, because in the Commonwealth you do not get to see a kind of very independent foreign policy exercised by the nation, the member nations of the Commonwealth. In fact, the hegemony is still of the UK or the Great Britain. But that is not the case with the idea or the vision that Bipin Chandrapal had after he came back from England. Even though he had a very internationalist outlook this time, he was talking about India taking a distinct part in the global arena, that India should be playing a very major role in the advancement and progress of the whole of humanity, of the global community. And
Yeah.
he was talking about global community at that time. So in that way,
Yeah.
he should be thought of as a pioneer in this idea,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
among Indians. But he was at the same time emphasizing that India should maintain her freedom in important areas like foreign policy, in the question of economy, and most importantly, how she will be creating the cultural contour, of which a great part would be played by education.
Mm.
So the other aspect of Bipin Chandrapal's thought that I really wanted to discuss was regarding national education.
Mm.
So we have already discussed in with regard to our discussions on other personalities that Bipin
Yeah.
Chandrapal played a very important role in creating and sustaining and furthering this movement called the national movement.
Mm.
National education,
Mm.
that is to create a kind of paradigm in which
Mm.
education will be imparted from a national standpoint, and in order
Right.
to strengthen the national life, in order to basically do nation making. Okay,
Mm.
for this he was quite clear of what role history will play.
Mm.
He had very unapologetically and vehemently, he had pointed out that so far the historical point of view that was given to the Indian people,
Mm.
and especially through university education, school and university education, the kind of history that the Indians were learning, there it was mainly a kind of perspective which helps the economic and political interests of the British. He talks of this particular form of history writing as something that does self-aggrandizement of the British interests. And he wanted to revert back to a position, or rather create a very new position, historical standpoint, from where
Mm.
the national interest of India will be of paramount importance when we are talking about how to write history, with which perspective, and therefore nation making will be the ultimate goal of history writing or historiography. So this
Okay.
is another very important aspect of Bipin Chandrapal's thought as a whole. For this, I would like to give an example from another of his speech, which was very interestingly delivered in, I think, in Bombay, and this was on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Okay,
Okay.
the speech itself is titled "Shivaji, the True Democrat."
I
Okay,
see.
Bipin Chandrapal, I should say, I should mention at this juncture, laid a great emphasis on the idea of democracy as a very perfected and coveted political ideal or system
Mm.
for which India should aspire. He was quite clear about this, that
Mm.
for the future of India, where India will be an independent nation,
Mm.
democracy is the only viable path or only
Mm.
option as a political system that
Mm.
India should aspire for. He was
Mm.
very particular that the voice of the people or the common people should find a platform, a proper political platform, and all the decisions, important decisions, has to be, in one way or the other, directly permeated by the citizens of India, of the future independent India. So let's come back to this speech that
Yeah.
Chandra delivered, called Shivaji the True Democrat. And here he talks about two very interesting ideas. First of all, I'd like to point out this stand that he took in order to how education, and especially historical education, should happen in the country. He says that the political significance of the national education movement, okay, is quite distinctly identifying the national education initiative as a movement. Okay, he says that the political significance of this, meaning national education movement, which I hope and trust will expand and gradually include every great name in our national life, whether ancient or modern, that is the heroes or heroines of Indian history, consists in this, that it is an emphatic protest against the unholy and unnatural attempt to manufacture Indian citizens through stupid textbooks or kept, within quotation, kept newspapers. So you can understand the kind of very strong language that he uses in order to describe the usual reading material that his contemporary Indians used to get. Number one, textbooks, by which he is indicating the kind of curriculum, and for that curriculum, the sort of textbooks that were written for universities and schools. And secondly, he identifies the major newspapers, so the mainstream media of his time, which were perpetuating ideas, especially with respect to history and historical figures attached to Indian history, Indian civilization, which were basically decimating the confidence of Indians. And he identified that as a major problem, a major roadblock on the path to nation making, and he wanted to correct that. What will be the method of correcting this problem? It says that India will appraise her own heroes by her own national touchstone, and will not, on any condition, accept the essay marks of foreign appraisers unfitted by ignorance and unqualified through self-interest to test the truth, however much their valuations may be authoritatively proclaimed by the official hierarchy. So he's saying that India will have to create an apparatus, a scholarly apparatus consisting of firstly scholars who are eligible to write historical documents, who are eligible to write history, and those scholars will have to produce historical texts. They will have to write books, which will appraise Indian heroes and heroines of Indian history and civilization from India's own national standpoint. So a nationalist viewpoint has to be the final and ultimate touchstone of evaluating the roles of these historical personalities in ancient, medieval, as well as modern India. He mentioned this quite emphatically, that it has to be an all-encompassing arc of history, where starting from the ancient times to the modern times, we'll have to choose our heroes and heroines. Okay.
Right.
And secondly, he points out why people who are writing from a foreign point of view, from an anti-nationalist point of view, are not suitable, are not eligible to write the history of India. He says that they are unfitted by ignorance and unqualified through self-interest. What do these words mean? Unfitted by ignorance means because these people are mainly foreign authors around 1900 and 1905. The people who were
Right.
writing history textbooks on India were mostly British or
Right.
European in general.
Right.
So he is pointing out that they are unfamiliar with the grain of Indian culture, with the very essence of Indian culture, and therefore
Yeah.
ignorant. He is using the word ignorance,
Right.
unfitted by ignorance. And he's
Hmm.
saying that they're unqualified by self interest. Why?
Right.
Because these people are basically advancing the economic, political, and cultural interest of Britain or Europeans in general, of the West in general. Therefore, they
Right.
are unqualified. Okay,
Yeah. This is
so
basically Chandranath Bosu's complaint as well.
yes, this was actually a common complaint. Rabindranath
Okay.
complains about it. Bankim Chandra has
Yeah.
complained about it quite far back, right, in time.
Right.
So these are basically the main thoughts of Bankim Chandra, sorry, of Bipin Chandra Pal. Um,
Right.
before giving this up for a Q&A session, I would like
Hmm.
to point out another idea of Bipin Chandra Pal, which is quite interesting, at least for
Right.
me, and why I was emphasizing on radical as a qualifier for Bipin Chandra Pal is a very
Yeah.
interesting word. You see, he had an interesting take on imperialism.
Okay.
Like any other nationalist, he had uh, an opposition, a very natural opposition to British imperialism, right? But
Okay.
he did not stop at evaluating imperialism as essentially a Western or a British phenomenon. He
Okay.
thought of imperialism as a political option. Whether India should aspire for it, that is different question. He
Hmm.
was more of the opinion that India should be opting for a democratic and a very modern democratic nation. That is the
Hmm.
aspiration. That should be the aspiration of India. But he
Hmm.
still talks about imperialism as an spiritual, as a cultural project. Okay, if I may describe it as that.
Right.
Let me simply quote from his own
Yeah.
words and then
Yeah.
maybe try to explain what that
Yeah.
means. Again, this is from the same speech on Shivaji that he delivered
Yeah.
in Bombay. He was talking about the greatness of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaja. He says
Hmm.
that this meeting in honor of the founder of the great Maratha Confederacy marks, in my opinion, an important stage in the progress of true imperialistic idea among us. This is a very interesting phrase, true
Yeah.
imperialistic idea.
Yeah.
The word imperialism, within quotes, has got, and very justly too, he says, a very bad odor about it just now.
Hmm.
But there never was a more noble word that has not been put to a more ignoble use,
Hmm.
and the same thing has happened with imperialism too. Okay? He
Okay.
says further, there is an imperialism which is hateful and ugly, which is ignoble and unrighteous and ungodly, so many
Hmm.
words, which
Hmm.
seeks other people's land, covets other people's gold,
Hmm.
and aims at the destruction of other people's freedom and autonomy.
Hmm.
This ignoble kind of imperialism happens just now to be rampant in certain quarters in England, in which the venal Tory press and the
Hmm.
short sighted conservative and unionist politicians love
Right.
to revel so much. But then he proceeds to give the other idea, the alternative idea
Yeah.
of imperialism. But the imperialistic sentiment that is gradually growing among the
Hmm.
educated and the cultured classes in India is not of this ignoble and unholy type. It is
Okay.
the imperialism not of self assertion, but of self effacement, sorry.
Right.
The imperialism not of hate, but of love, which aims at the federation of communities allied to one another by geographical, social, or political or religious affinities for mutual help and progress, and for the furtherance of the universal ends of the whole human race.
I see.
Okay?
I see.
So basically, he's making a distinction between the imperialism practiced by Great Britain by the
Yeah.
British, and another purer kind of imperialism, which he says that his countrymen, Indians, and especially the educated and cultured sections of it, are
Mm.
slowly finding attractive, and therefore they are holding on to it, they're trying to hold on to it, and
Mm.
then finally he hopes that their countrymen, that his countrymen, Indians, will go on to spread this idea of imperialism, where self-effacement, where one has to do a lot of self-sacrifice, have to efface the self. There is no
Mm.
place of ego. There is no place of, a blind race for power,
Yeah.
and where universal ideas of welfare and love will be dominating. Whose ideas and ideals do we get to see being echoed here? I would name two people. One is Raja Ram Mohan Rai. Why? Because of the Brahmo movement with which he was very strongly connected. So universal religion, that is something that Raja Ram Mohan Rai was trying to establish and preach. Okay,
Mm.
of which a special expression for Indians would be the Vedanta Pratipadito Shatta Dharma, or the Brahmo Dharma,
Mm.
which was the name given by Maharishi Devendranath.
Mm.
Next, the personality whose ideas and ideals, the echoes of whose ideas and ideals we get to hear in Bipin Chandra Pal's speech is none other than Bankim Chandra Chatterjee.
Okay.
If you remember, in our discussion on Bankim Chandra, especially while explaining Anushilan Tattva and how Anushilan Tattva explains Swadesh Priti, and Swadesh Priti as a very special expression of Vishwa Priti, universal love,
Yeah.
we get to see an echo of that very idea in this
Right.
particular speech, where Bipin Chandrapal is talking about two kinds of imperialism, and which special kind of imperialism, the second kind, in his opinion, the Indians should embrace, and not only that, they should aspire to spread that imperialism throughout the world.
Mm.
So these are, for me, as far as I'm concerned, the most interesting threads of Bipin Chandrapal's thought. Now,
Right.
let's take some questions.
Yeah. In terms of this kind of imperialism, uh, did they flesh out any plans like how to do it? Or should it just happen with the at the hands of spiritual leaders and different organizations, or should a
No,
government
it
also?
a very, very important question. Thank you for raising it. It helps explain this idea of imperialism further. So people should not think that this idea of imperialism that Bipin Chandrapal is encouraging his countrymen to embrace is only out and out religious or spiritual idea. He is talking about a position from where India can dominate the thought of the world, and that domination can happen on multiple courses.
Hmm.
One course happens to be, of course, obviously religious or spiritual ideas.
Hmm.
Why? Because Bipin Chandra, like many of his contemporaries, Rabindranath, Swami Vivekananda, Bankim Chandra,
Hmm.
he used to believe that religious ideas and ideals, spiritual ideas and ideals, were the special forte of the Indian race. Okay,
Okay.
this is something that his next generation, especially through the voice of Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar, would refute.
Hmm.
Okay, but
Hmm.
Bipin Chandra, even after saying that religion and spirituality being the main plank of India dominating the thought of the world, he says that India has also to offer cultural elements. India has to offer certain ideas and ideals in philosophy, and philosophy not in the sense of religious philosophy, but also political philosophy. In fact, he talks about the ideas of Chanakya, how political ideals of Chanakya can actually provide the political thought
Hmm.
of global political thinkers, especially dominated by the Western thinkers, a very new paradigm of looking at several ideas of welfare, of foreign policy, and many other aspects of administration, as well as politics as a whole.
Hmm.
So Bipin Chandrapal is first of all identifying elements from Indian civilization and especially from Indian history which are unique, and then how these unique ideas and ideals can be spread throughout the world, how India can gift these ideas and ideals through the entire world, and therefore elevate the consciousness and elevate the quality of life, uh,
Hmm.
elevate the quality of political life, elevate the quality of religious life, cultural life, all these different aspects of human life
Hmm.
through across the globe. So
Right.
India first has to attain freedom. So his reason, the main argument that Bipin Chandrapal used to advance in most of his speeches, and his most famous speeches were delivered, I think, in 1907 in Madras,
Okay.
for which he was also hounded by the British police, by the entire British you know, colonial administration in India.
Hmm.
Even it went so far that Lord Minto had written to Morley back in England that Bipin Chandrapal should be either captured and put in prison, or he should be exiled. Otherwise, his ideas are becoming too seditious. That was his
Hmm.
opinion. So
I see.
basically, in these speeches delivered in Madras, Bipin Chandrapal was saying the same kind of things that I have explained so far.
Hmm.
Firstly, talking about how history should be, you know, uh, history should be written from an Indian perspective, from a
Hmm.
nationalist Indian perspective.
Right.
Secondly, how India should aspire for this kind of new imperialism,
Hmm.
dominating global thought. And thirdly, how Indians themselves should be advancing political freedom, and they should aspire for complete political freedom
Hmm.
through the ideas of, through the methods rather of boycott and Swadeshi. Okay,
Right.
but
Right.
his argument
Hmm.
regarding why India should attain complete freedom was
Hmm.
this: that in order for the quality of global life in social, political, cultural, religious, or spiritual segments to improve, India must attain freedom. Without
Okay.
India becoming a free and confident nation, it is not possible for the world to see that sort of an improvement in the different segments of the human life. So
I
this is
see.
why Bankim Chandra, sorry, again, this is why Bipin Chandrapal was a staunch supporter of complete freedom for India.
Right. Sir, this thing, this hypothetical global domination of India in terms of culture and spirituality, do you think, wouldn't you say it has kind of already happened? Because these days, yoga, meditation, and Bhagavad Gita is considered to be a common thing among every country in the world almost. But I think a lot of it has happened without Hinduism's credit. At least so far, people knew at least yoga meditation came up on the face of the earth from India. These days, there are people are trying to actively deny the connection between Hinduism and yoga, and even in the future, I think people will come upon deliberately or non-deliberately on stumble upon Indian topics on Hindu philosophy, Hindu spiritual ideas, but Hinduism probably will not get the credit for it. Do you think so? And do you think whatever Bipin Chandrapal's dreams were, they were kind of getting fulfilled with the popularity of ISKCON and stuff?
Yes, it would be definitely correct to say that what Bipin Chandra was aspiring for in terms of this global domination of India in the realm
Hmm.
of ideas and ideals,
Yeah.
that had started happening right from Bipin Chandrapal's own times, right?
Hmm.
So I think it started right from the moment that Swami Vivekananda won over the Western audience in
Right.
USA and in England through his speeches, through his activities, through his missionary work, even. You know,
Right.
and Swami Vivekananda also ensured that after he had left his work and he had to come back, and he was sort of aware that he would not live long, he made sure that his work of this missionary nature would continue in the West through
Okay.
his other brother disciples and also his own disciples. So he had
I see.
sent Swami Abhedananda as his
Okay.
successor, right? And there
Okay.
happened a very strong missionary work stationed in the USA, centered in USA, that Swami Abhedananda had led, and he was quite successful in sort of establishing, giving a permanent imprint to Vivekananda's work, the work that Vivekananda had started. So with Vivekananda, this sort of global domination of India in the realm of ideas and ideals starts, at least in the spiritual and religious domains. But this was not the only segment that Bipin Chandra Pal had envisioned for India to dominate. Bipin Chandra Pal also wanted India to have domination in, let's say, political thought. How the political ideas and ideals would be envisioned by a global community. Okay,
Yeah.
how the ideas of welfare, for example, just to give one example of from a plethora of political ideas and ideals, how welfare can be conceptualized and practiced, how it should be practically um, implemented in the lives of nations. That is something that Bipin Chandra also envisioned, also wanted
Okay.
for India to dominate that sort of segment. He
Okay.
also wanted India to capture, if I can use that word, the cultural space through literature, arts, and performance. So he had a very strong conviction that Indian literature and art, and also Indian architecture, had a very superior place in the uh, global scenario of
I
art and
see.
culture. And therefore, India has a lot of things to teach the global community in these regards. That
Right.
dream of Bipin Chandra has also, I would say, materialized to some extent, to not a great extent, I won't say that, but to some extent, many people have taken a leaf out of Indian art and Indian literature and got influenced in many aspects, especially with the kind of uh, art and the kind of literature that got started in the modernist era. We get to
Hmm.
see that great poets getting influenced by the works of modern Indian poets like Rabindranath himself, and
Hmm.
also ancient Indian literature like Ramayana, like Vedanta literature itself, not
Hmm.
just considering Vedanta as a theological or philosophical work, but also
Hmm.
as a literary work. Okay, it
Right.
has very great potential to be looked upon as good poetry.
Yeah.
So, in these regards, also, Bipin Chandra had envisioned India would come to dominate the arena of thought in the global
I
community.
see. I see. Okay. Next question is again from a viewer. Where did the question go? Yeah. He's saying Bipin Pal was unfortunately against quote unquote political criminalism, aka revolutionaries. So he wasn't as radical as we think. Is this true?
Uh, this is not so. I won't answer in such black and white terms. I won't describe it
Okay.
in such black and white terms. I think that Bipin Chandra Pal was mainly advancing the political strategies or methods of boycott and Swadeshi. Of course, he had some role, significant role to play in encouraging revolutionary nationalism. Where
Okay.
violence would play a very important part.
Hmm.
In fact, you can see that that sort of close connection already can be established between Bipin Chandra Pal and Sri Aurobindo. If
Hmm.
we keep in mind the earlier life of Sri Aurobindo, Balindra Kumar Ghosh, and the entire group, the Jugantar group, which
Yeah.
strived for the Alipur bomb case or Maniktala bomb conspiracy
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
Now, Bipin Chandra Pal was, like I have already mentioned, the founder of Bande Mataram, founder as well as editor for
Hmm.
some time before
Hmm.
Aurobindo takes over.
Hmm.
So, the program of revolutionary nationalism had already started with Bipin Chandra Pal. What Sri Aurobindo, even though he had not become Sri Aurobindo at that time, Aurobindo Ghosh had done was to give it a more intense form. So he basically intensified the work that Bipin Chandra Pal had already started. And we
Okay.
also get to see the kind of direct help that Bipin Chandra Pal had provided to the so-called radical revolutionary nationalists, like Aurobindo himself, because the British government wanted Bipin Chandra Pal to become a witness against Aurobindo, okay,
Okay.
in the Alipur bomb case, but
Okay.
he flatly refused to be a witness.
Okay.
For this, he had to spend several months in prison.
I
Okay,
see.
so this is something that tells us the kind of sympathy that he had for the more extremist segments of nationalists.
Hmm.
So that is something that we should keep in mind. And of course, he himself was preaching only Swadeshi and boycott. And he had radical ideas with regard to how imperialism should be understood, how national education should be a very important plank of the work of the revolutionaries, of the nationalists as a whole,
Hmm.
because he basically describes history as the factory in which citizens are manufactured. Okay,
Hmm.
like I have mentioned from one of his quotes.
Hmm.
So the manufactured citizens of the British universities
Hmm.
are going to be uh, quite anti to nationalist ideas and ideals. This
Hmm.
is something that he very clearly articulated. And he was of the opinion that the institutions that national education movement will build will manufacture the true nationalist Indians.
Okay.
So one has to look at it from a deeper perspective. I think it will be very superficial to look at Bipin Chandra Pal as not so extremist because he was not directly preaching violence. In
Okay.
fact, if I just read out one
Yeah.
assessment of the British officials, how they had
Hmm.
described um, Bipin Chandra Pal's speeches, then I think
Hmm.
it will be very clear. So, uh, the British officials were reporting internally on Bipin Chandra Pal's speeches, especially those
Hmm.
speeches that I just mentioned, which he delivered
Yeah.
in Madras in
Yeah.
1907. This report says about those speeches. It first describes Bipin Chandra Pal as, quote, a man of great intellectual force and high character, unquote, who had, again, quote, the peculiarity of expressing extreme views in modest, almost civil language. So basically, we should also look upon this particular strategy of Bipin Chandrapal, that he had devised a special language in
Hmm.
which he could express extreme views, which
Hmm.
can be seen as very radical views, but you
Yeah.
cannot really pinpoint that
Hmm.
this is where he
Yeah.
has gone awry and he is becoming very,
Yeah.
ballistic and
Yeah.
firebrand, and therefore he should be tried for sedition or something like that. So it
Hmm.
was very, very difficult for the British administration to pin him down on the
Hmm.
grounds of sedition because of the kind of special, very fine language that he had manufactured. One can
Right.
say that he had devised that language in that special way where
Hmm.
his ideas were very extreme, but there could not be any specific point on which he could be held for sedition.
Hmm.
So this was
Okay.
a
This is
specialty of Bipin Chandra.
yeah. Okay, next question is, I guess it's a more of a point, but very interesting one. Bipin Pal mentions in his Nationality and Empire that caste system prevents problems of extreme capitalism like the ones he saw in Europe and America of those times. Maybe not
Hmm.
capitalism of today, but capitalism of those times at least.
Caste system prevents problems of extreme capitalism in Europe and America. Well, yes, but do you know what his views were with regard to the caste system in India? He was vehemently opposing them, like many other intellectuals of his time. Hello, am I audible? Hello, hello, Niranjan. I think your screen has gone still. It's frozen. I think we have lost Niranjan for bad network. Let's just wait for him to get back. Hello, hello, Niranjan, are you there? Okay, maybe we can continue, and meanwhile Niranjan will join in. So Bipin Pal's views with regard to caste system in the Indian context were against perpetuating a birth-based caste system in which the hierarchy will be maintained and identified. Hi Niranjan, you're back. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
we had lost you for some time.
yeah, yeah. Glad.
Okay,
I'll listen to it from the playback later on. Yeah, I missed
right.
all of
So
what you said right now.
okay,
Okay.
so basically responding to this question of
Yeah.
caste system and how it has a sort of um, positive effect on extreme capitalism. I mean,
Hmm.
it prevents problems of extreme
Yeah.
capitalism, as the questioner has mentioned.
Hmm.
But I observe his stance vis-a-vis caste system in the Indian context as being, the general stance of his fellow intellectuals of the time, such as
Okay.
Rabindranath Tagore, who were
Okay.
opposed to the birth-based hierarchy of caste, and he was quite vocal against the caste hierarchy based on birth, and
Okay.
the social reform and the social movement that he envisioned, and also the democratic quality that he envisioned for India, for free India in future, had a very distinct program for eradicating such birth-based hierarchies. So,
Okay.
so far as caste system in the Indian context was concerned, Bipin
Yeah.
Chandra was against it, and he refused to give any credence or value to
Hmm.
birth-based caste.
Right. Okay, sir. This is a very common discussion and debate going on inside the sort of the non-left political space today in India. Shouldn't we abandon terms like caste and use more precise terms like jati, dvija, varna, etc.?
Well, we can do that, but it's not so easy that we will just overnight drop the term and replace it with something else. It does not happen like that. For that, one needs to work a lot in terms of creating the discourse, sustaining the discourse, and making it sizable, so that
Hmm.
people can slowly realize that there are inherent problems in these translations or these terminology
Hmm.
using foreign language
Yeah.
words, loan words from a foreign language.
Yeah.
So I think that in the present context, we should be using the term caste, but with considerable amounts of explanation wherever we are using, we're providing the context of what caste might mean in a
Yeah.
different national or cultural context, and what
Yeah.
it has come to mean in the current political arena in India, and
Hmm.
what jati and varna signify in the
Hmm.
cultural memory, in the cultural sphere of our discussions. I mean, as a Hindu or as a Buddhist or as an Indian in general, what the
Hmm.
words jati might imply, and how
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
people really know the term varna even. Okay,
Hmm.
I think jati is something, or jat in Bengali, even in Hindi, zat,
Hmm.
jat,
Yeah.
these terms are much more prevalent. So
Hmm.
my suggestion would be that let's not think that it will be so easy to change these terms or drop these terms overnight, but a discourse has to be created through
Hmm.
scholarship, through discussions like this, informal and formal, on all sorts of platforms, where
Hmm.
these terms and their meanings, their significance in various contexts, in the political, in the religious, in the traditional law context, traditional legal context, all
Hmm.
these different contexts have to be uh, you know brought into the discussion, so
Hmm.
that we can understand how these terms differ from each other, and where a line can be drawn.
Yeah. Sreejit, a bit of a follow up. Shouldn't academics at least start the discourse on abandoning terms like caste?
Yeah, I think some effort has already begun in this regard, where the kind of stance that I was just describing, where more context are being provided as to
Hmm.
what caste means in a Western context, and what it means in an
Yeah.
Indian context,
Hmm.
and all these sort of discussions are have at least begun. So
Hmm.
I think that, like the academics are doing in their own sphere, even though that their number may not be very significant at this point in time, uh,
Yeah.
these informal discussions where we are talking about caste, jati, varna, even
Hmm.
though today's discussion is not specifically about that,
Yeah.
should take up this kind of questions, and these kind of issues should be uh, uh, addressed,
Hmm.
where distinctions and significances have to be pointed out.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Now, next question is Bipin Pal on his nationality and empire said, quote unquote, the success of Pan Islamism will never mean another Muslim eruption upon civilized world, but unity of Muslims against Western powers. Your views?
So I think we have already addressed,
That
this
is what I
question.
was thinking.
Haven't we?
Yes. Wait. There are some more things he mentioned as questions. There may be.
The position of Bipin Chandra Pal, just to refresh our memory,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
position of Bipin Chandra Pal on Pan-Islamism was quite clear. He was one of the first people to point out that Pan-Islamism is going to be a major roadblock in the
Hmm.
nation-making project in India. And as
Hmm.
far back as 1914, 1-4, he had warned Congress leaders and
Hmm.
the Indian populace, in Indian public in general, that
Hmm.
if we sort of collaborate with the Pan-Islamism project, the project of
Hmm.
Pan-Islamism, that will be detrimental for the nation-making project in India. And he was quite prophetic in identifying this, right? Because
Hmm.
that's exactly what happened. I mean, with the religion-based uh, partition of the country, and how distinct idea of nation being created uh, for the Muslims through the Pakistan movement. All
Yeah.
that was nothing but the outcomes of this Pan-Islamic or Pan-Islamist movement.
Yeah.
So I think we should recognize Bipin Chandrapal's pioneering role in this
Hmm.
regard, and there should be a discussion why his warnings were not heeded that much, why he was
Yeah.
sort of sidelined. I
Hmm.
think in this regard, if I may just give a hint,
Hmm.
the same kind of political rivalry would come up, if we try to find out reasons or factors which resulted in the sidelining of Bipin Chandrapal and his views within the
Hmm.
Congress. The same thing, the same kind of progression of history that we
Hmm.
saw with the uh, figure of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Okay,
Okay.
so I think the question of political rivalry and dominance within the Congress,
Hmm.
where Gandhiji's ideas and ideals have to be given priority. That sort of sphere had already begun within the Congress itself, and you
Okay.
get to see the kind of complete break that
Hmm.
Bipin Chandra Pal had with the Congress happens around the same time when the non-cooperation and Khilafat movement starts. That is around 1921-22. So
I
you
see.
can understand what might be the reasons for Bipin Chandra Pal's complete fallout and break with the
Yeah.
Congress. He
Yeah.
got sidelined, his views were ignored, and his warnings were unheeded. They had fallen
Hmm.
on deaf ears.
Yeah.
So this was quite tragic.
Yeah. Even Sri Aurobindo was pretty early on to predict that we can't really go around cooperating as much as you want with Pan Islamists, and even he was
That's
ignored.
right. That's quite correct.
Okay, here he's asking, in what sense did Bipin Chandrapal call Shivaji a monarch democratic? Even though he was a monarch, why did he get called democratic?
Yes. So Bipin Chandrapal looked upon Shivaji as one of the early manifestations of this imperialistic idea that I was describing. You know,
Hmm.
he says that Shivaji had embodied quite early, towards the late medieval era, Shivaji had embodied this imperialistic idea where the Hindu ideas of welfare, the Hindu ideas of politics, social reform, and education, religion, all these aspects would spread throughout the four corners of the world. But with regard to Shivaji, he talks about the foundation of the Maratha Confederacy, and he says that from Maharashtra, the movement that Shivaji had begun had spread throughout all corners of the Indian subcontinent. So he says he identifies Shivaji as the progenitor of this movement of good kind of imperialism towards the late medieval era. And to begin with, it had spread throughout the four corners of the Indian subcontinent. And that in the modern era, this movement has to be resuscitated, it has to be rejuvenated, brought back to life, and then it has to be spread all throughout the globe. Okay, so when democracy is an idea that Bipin Chandrapal really valued, he was looking at the participation of the people in the mainstream of national life, in the project of nation making, in a very concrete manner. So it's not like just giving uh, one's vote that makes it democratic, but
Hmm.
participating in a concrete manner,
Yeah.
creating objects, creating systems, and creating institutions where people can collaborate. Not just collaborate, the creation of the very creation of that institution or that system will have the participation of people, and in a
Okay.
non-exploitative way,
Hmm.
in a non-exploitative way.
Yeah.
So that is the ideal of democracy that Bipin Chandrapal had, and in that strain, I think this ideal of imperialism, which he thought was embodied in the figure of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, can be brought together. Idealism
Right.
can be, the common platform
Hmm.
where such apparently opposing ideas like democracy and imperialism can be brought together, in a
Yeah.
very conceptual manner.
Yeah. Right, Srijita, this is the last question for today. A few days
Okay.
back, I was imagining a meme. I can't make memes, so I have not made it yet. I'll ask someone else to make it. Hindutva as a concept, or what we understand Hindutva to be today, many things in the past also can be termed as Hindutva in today's, if we apply today's lens, right? So, in that sense, I was thinking that Chhatrapati Shivaji came up with the idea, then many Bengali nationalists embodied it and propagated it further. Then it got to Savarkar again, and I guess it will someday again come back to Bengal. How fair do you think this diagram in my head is, and would you give credit to some other Bengali people as well in between 19th century Bengali nationalists and between Savarkar or after Savarkar, if anyone's there?
No, if I was imagining this sort of meme or this sort of
Hmm.
image,
Hmm.
a collage of
Yeah.
what Hindutva would look like in terms of the personalities or the thought leaders or the religious as well as political leaders of it, then I think, Chhatrapati Shivaji, the figure of Chhatrapati Shivaji, would be a very universal kind of figure, universal in the context of India, of course.
Hmm.
That he is a figure that Bengalis can connect with, that a
Hmm.
Punjabi can connect with, that a Tamil person can connect with, and of course the Marathis will connect with. But this is not, the kind of position that Veer Savarkar can claim. That is
Hmm.
something that I am quite clear about. Okay, I think, if we are trying to create a sort of hierarchy,
Hmm.
even though it is not some hierarchy as such,
Yeah.
it's like, the positioning in
Yeah.
our hearts,
Hmm.
how much space that these personalities can claim.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the kind of space, the amount of space that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj would claim will
Hmm.
certainly not be the amount of space that Veer Savarkar or even
Yeah.
Bipin Chandra can claim.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they have their own specific contributions, which are invaluable contributions, and for which
Hmm.
we cannot afford to forget these personalities. Which is why
Yeah.
we are talking about Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay, Bankim Chandra, Rabindranath, and Bipin Chandra Pal. Okay,
Hmm.
we have to look at how this jigsaw puzzle of sorts,
Yeah.
which can be thought of as the whole picture, the full picture of Hindutva, or maybe a
Hmm.
mosaic,
Right.
has certain small or certain big parts, certain small pieces and certain big
Yeah.
pieces. Okay,
Yeah.
so each and every idea and each and every progenitor of that idea, who embodies that idea, who originates that idea,
Hmm.
can be thought of in terms of that smaller or bigger size of the pieces of
Right.
that puzzle or the mosaic. So I think that's how you can think of it.
True. Yeah. Okay. Okay,
Chhatrapati
Srijita. Thank
Shivaji
you.
Maharaj
Yeah. Yeah.
is,
Go on.
sorry, just to finish this.
Yeah.
Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is something who in the medieval, so-called dark medieval era.
Hmm.
In our case, it is really dark.
Yeah.
The dark ages have been, the term dark ages have been challenged by European scholars in the context
Yeah.
of Renaissance.
Yeah.
But I think in the context of Indian history, the medieval
Yeah.
or the years when
Yeah.
the Mughal dynasty was at its
Hmm.
peak, with people like Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, it was
Hmm.
really dark.
Yeah.
And in that darkness, when that dawn of Hindutva again came out,
Yeah.
that happened through Shivaji Maharaj and of
Hmm.
course his guru Samarth Ramdas.
Yeah.
So he has the place that only a king can claim in our hearts, and it's not just
Hmm.
because he's a king. It is because the idea and the ideal that he embodies.
Hmm.
Those ideals are invaluable for us as Hindus and
Yeah.
as Indians. Therefore, Shivaji Maharaj has such a distinguished and such a high place in our hearts.
Right. Thank you, Srijita. Thank you for this very inspiring talk. And when can we have you back soon? And who is our next person of discussion, person of interest?
Yeah, I was thinking that probably we can talk about Professor Binay Kumar Sarkar next, because
Right.
he makes a sort of distinct break from this previous generation's ideas, where
Hmm.
religion is the forte of India, and in all other aspects, India has to learn from others. This is a thought paradigm that Professor Binay Kumar Sarkar really, turns on its head. So
Okay.
I would like to talk about him next.
Yeah, I have many questions about him already, so I'm very much looking forward to it. So thank you, Srijita. Good night. Thank you
Thank you.
guys for joining.
Good night.
Good night.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं दुराद्रष्टाम्बरप्रदं हस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयः पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहुसमायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहुसमायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत्